The stars had always been cruel to the Kithera, but never like this. Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the viewport of the research ship New Horizon, watching the distant warning beacons flash red against the black of space. Each pulse meant the same thing: death, contamination, stay away. Beyond those beacons lay the Kithera home system, once bright with crystal cities that caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow cascades. Now it was a tomb. How many are left down there? Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Williams checked her scanner readings one more time, hoping the numbers would somehow be different. They weren't. Best estimates put it at 2 million, sir. Maybe less. 2 million, down from 15 million just 18 months ago. Morrison had seen plenty of disasters in his 20 years of deep space service, but nothing like this. Entire worlds going silent wasn't supposed to happen anymore. The galaxy was civilized now, or so everyone liked to think. The quantum plague had hit the Kithera harder than anyone imagined possible. Their crystalline bodies, which had once made them the most beautiful species in known space, became their curse. The plague attacked their energy-based biology directly, turning their translucent skin dull and cracked, shutting down the natural processes that kept them alive. Worse, it spread through their technology, corrupting everything they touched. Sir, another distress signal coming through, called Ensign Bradley from the communication station. The young man's face was pale as he listened to the transmission. They're asking for food synthesizers again, medical supplies, basic life support equipment. Morrison clenched his fists. The same request they'd been making for 18 months. The same pleas that had gone unanswered while the Galactic Coalition wrung their hands and talked about contamination protocols and acceptable losses. The truth was simpler and uglier than anyone wanted to admit. The Kithera were dying, and the galaxy was letting it happen because saving them was too risky, too expensive, too complicated. It was easier to quarantine their entire system and wait for problem to solve itself through extinction. Play the transmission, Morrison ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life with a voice that barely sounded alive. The Kithera speaking was young, maybe equivalent to a human teenager, but her words carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death. Please, she whispered in heavily accented standard. Our children are crystallizing. We have no power left in the eastern cities. The medical centers shut down last week. If anyone is listening, if anyone cares, we need help. We just need someone to care enough to try. The transmission cut to static. Morrison stared at the speakers long after the sound faded, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard dozens of these messages over the past months, each one more desperate than the last. Each one ignored by every civilized species in the galaxy. Williams moved closer to the captain's chair. Sir, Coalition regulations are clear. Any vessel that enters the quarantine zone will be considered compromised and denied re-entry to all Coalition space. That includes Earth. I know the regulations, Lieutenant. We'd be exiles, sir, cut off from home forever. Our families, our careers, everything we've worked for. Morrison turned away from the viewport and looked around his bridge. The New Horizon was a research vessel, not built for combat or heroics. His crew were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. They'd signed up to study distant stars and catalog new worlds, not to become galactic outcasts. But they were also human. Dr. Parker spoke up from her station near the back of the bridge. Captain, I've been analyzing the plague data. It's definitely artificial. Someone engineered this thing specifically to target Kithera physiology. This isn't some natural disaster. It's genocide. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Morrison had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his anger burn hotter. Somewhere out there, an entire species was dying from a weapon designed to kill them slowly and painfully, and the galaxy was treating it like a natural disaster to be contained rather than a crime to be stopped. How long would it take to develop a cure? He asked. Parker shook her head. Months, maybe years. I'd need to work directly with Kithera medical teams, study living subjects, understand their biology from the ground up, and I need a fully equipped research facility. Morrison walked to the center of the bridge, looking at each of his crew members in turn. These were good people. They had families waiting for them back on Earth. Careers that would be destroyed if they violated quarantine. They had every reason to turn around and pretend they'd never heard those desperate voices calling out from a dying world. Set course for the Kithra system, he said quietly. The bridge erupted in surprised voices, but Morrison held up his hand for silence. When they quieted, he continued, I won't order anyone to follow me into exile. Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship can do so at our next port call. But I can't live with myself knowing we had the chance to save lives and chose not to because it was inconvenient. William stepped forward first. With respect, sir, you're an idiot. She paused and smiled grimly. But you're our idiot. The Kithra have been waiting 18 months for someone to care. I guess that's us. One by one, the rest of the crew nodded their agreement. They were about to become criminals, traitors to the Coalition's laws and outcasts from their own species. But sometimes being human meant choosing what was right over what was safe. The New Horizon shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kithra system. What appeared on their screens made the entire bridge crew fall silent. The homeworld of Eltar hung in space like a dying jewel, where satellite images from 2 years ago had shown glittering crystal cities that reflected starlight in brilliant displays. Now there were only dark patches spreading across the surface like a disease. Entire continents had gone black. Jesus, whispered Dr. Parker, her medical scanner trembling in her hands. The life signs are so weak I can barely detect them. Captain Morrison gripped his command chair as the reality hit him. They weren't just looking at a planet under quarantine. They were looking at a world in its death throes. The beautiful crystal spires that had once made the Kithra homeworld famous across the galaxy were crumbling. Cities that housed millions now sat empty and dark. Sir, called out Ensign Bradley from communications, his voice shaking. I'm picking up a transmission from the surface. It's coming from what used to be their capital city. Put it through. The being that appeared on their main screen barely looked like the Kithra from the history books, where their species was known for translucent, rainbow-colored skin that sparkled with inner light. This creature's crystalline body was dull gray and cracked like old stone. When she moved, Morrison could hear the grinding sound of damaged crystal plates scraping against each other. Unknown vessel, the Kithra said, her voice barely above a whisper. You have entered a quarantine zone. Are you here to die with us? The question hit Morrison like a physical blow. This is Captain Morrison of the human research vessel New Horizon. We received your distress calls. We're here to help. The alien's multifaceted eyes widened, and for a moment her dulled skin flickered with a hint of a natural light that should have been flowing through it. Help? But the Coalition has forbidden all contact. Your species will exile you for this. Let's worry about that, Morrison replied. What do you need most urgently? The Kithra leader, Morrison could see now she wore the broken remains of some kind of official regalia, seemed to struggle with the concept that someone had actually come. After 18 months of being abandoned by the galaxy, the idea of rescue seemed impossible to process. Food synthesizers, she finally managed. Our children are crystallizing from starvation. Their bodies are hardening and cracking because they can't process energy properly anymore. We have maybe 300,000 juveniles left from over 2 million. They're dying first because they need more energy to grow. Dr. Parker stepped forward. Captain, request permission to beam down to the surface with a medical team. Morrison nodded, then turned back to the screen. What's your name? I am Elder Zara, last surviving member of the Planetary Council. The others, the plague took them weeks ago. Elder Zara, we're sending down medical supplies and food synthesizers immediately. Dr. Parker here is one of the best xenobiologists in human space. She's going to figure out how to cure this plague. Zara's damaged face showed something Morrison hadn't expected to see: tears. In Kithra, they came as tiny crystal fragments that fell from their eyes and chimed softly when they hit the ground. Why? She asked. Why would your people risk everything for us? We have nothing to offer you. We can't even leave our system to trade anymore. Morrison found himself thinking about his own daughter back on Earth, probably getting ready for school right now. What would he want someone to do if she were dying and he couldn't save her. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because somebody has to. 3 hours later, Morrison stood in the beam-down chamber, watching his medical team prepare for transport. Dr. Parker was loading emergency medical supplies, while her assistant, Dr. Collins, checked the portable life support systems they'd need on the surface. Sir, Lieutenant Williams approached with a worried expression. Long-range sensors are picking up coalition ships, moving toward our position. Looks like a full enforcement squadron. Morrison had expected this. The coalition monitored all hyperspace jumps, especially near quarantine zones. Someone would have noticed their arrival and reported it up the chain of command. How long do we have? Maybe 6 hours before they reach weapons range. Morrison made his decision. All non-essential personnel transfer to the surface. Set up a permanent medical station in their capital city. This isn't going to be a quick rescue mission. Dr. Parker paused in her preparations. Jake, once we go down there, we can't come back up. The quarantine protocols mean anything that touches the surface is considered contaminated. We'll be stuck here with them. I know. For the rest of our lives. No going home. No seeing our families again. We'll be exiles forever. Morrison looked around at his crew. These people had followed him here, knowing the cost. They'd chosen to throw away their old lives for the chance to save strangers they'd never met. Anyone who wants to change their minds, speak up now, he said. No judgment, no shame. This is bigger than any of us signed up for. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Dr. Collins spoke up. Captain, my dad always told me that you're not really alive unless you're living for something bigger than yourself. I guess this is my chance to find out what that means. One by one, the rest of the team nodded their agreement. They were about to become the most wanted criminals in coalition space, branded as contaminated and cut off from everything they'd ever known. But when Morrison looked at the dying world below them, at the desperate faces of a species facing extinction, he knew they were making the only choice human conscience would allow. All right, then, he said, stepping onto the transport platform. Let's go save a civilization. 3 weeks had passed since the New Horizon crew set foot on Veltar, and Morrison barely recognized a man staring back at him in the mirror. His uniform was stained with crystalline dust that seemed to get into everything on the Kithara homeworld. Dark circles rimmed his eyes from sleepless nights spent coordinating relief efforts. But for the first time in 18 months, the planet's emergency broadcast had stopped. The medical station they'd built in the ruins of the capital city hummed with activity. Dr. Parker worked around the clock with the surviving Kithara scientists, tried to understand how the quantum plague had been engineered to target their unique biology. Her assistant, Dr. Collins, had figured out how to modify human food synthesizers to produce the high-energy compounds that Kithara children needed to survive. Morrison was reviewing supply reports when Lieutenant Williams burst into the command tent, her face pale with worry. Sir, we got incoming. It's Admiral Hayes himself, and he doesn't look happy. The hologram that materialized in the center of the tent showed a man Morrison had once respected. Admiral Robert Hayes had been Morrison's commanding officer 5 years ago, back when following orders seemed like the most important thing in the universe. Commander Morrison, Hayes said, his voice carrying the full authority of Coalition High Command. You are in direct violation of Galactic Coalition Quarantine Protocol 7. You have compromised the safety of human space and ignored direct orders to withdraw. Explain yourself. Morrison straightened his shoulders, knowing this conversation would determine the fate of not just his crew, but potentially the entire Kithara species. Admiral, we've discovered something critical. This plague wasn't some natural disaster. It was engineered specifically to target Kithara physiology. Someone created this weapon deliberately. Hayes' expression didn't change. That information is classified above your clearance level. Commander, the origin of the plague is not your concern. The words hit Morrison like a slap. You knew? You've known this whole time that someone was committing genocide, and you did nothing. What I know is that you violated the most serious quarantine in Coalition history. You exposed your entire crew to contamination and potentially threatened billions of lives across human space. Morrison felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. Admiral, we've been here for 3 weeks. None of my people have shown any signs of infection. The plague doesn't affect human biology the same way it affects Kithera. We could have been helping them from the beginning. The decision has been made, Commander. You have exactly 12 hours to evacuate your people and surrender your vessel for decontamination. Any personnel who refuse will be considered permanently contaminated and banned from all Coalition space. Morrison looked around the tent at his crew. William stood at attention, despite the exhaustion written across her face. Dr. Parker had paused in her research, a half-completed analysis of plague samples still glowing on her screen. Through the tent flaps, he could see Kithera children playing outside, children who had been dying 3 weeks ago and were now laughing again. And if we refuse? Morrison asked. Hayes' face hardened. Then I will consider your vessel hostile and act accordingly. Your 12 hours. The hologram flickered out, leaving the tent in silence. Morrison sat heavily in his chair, feeling the weight of command like never before. With a single word, he could doom his entire crew to permanent exile from everything they'd ever known. Their families, their homes, their futures, all will be lost. Dr. Parker was the first to speak. Jake, I've been analyzing the plague structure. I think I could develop a cure, but I need time. Maybe 6 months of continuous work with willing Kithera subjects. And if we leave now, they all die. Every last one of them. The plague is accelerating. Without constant medical intervention, they have maybe 2 months before total species extinction. Morrison closed his eyes, thinking about his daughter Amy back on Earth. She was 16 now, probably getting ready for her college entrance exams. If he stayed here, he'd never see her graduate, never walk her down the aisle, never meet his grandchildren. But if he left, he'd never be able to look at himself in the mirror again. I need to address the crew, he said finally. An hour later, Morrison stood before his 43 crew members in the makeshift assembly area. Behind them, Kithera families went about their daily routines, tending to their crystal gardens, teaching their children, rebuilding what the plague had destroyed. I won't lie to you, Morrison began. Admiral Hayes has given us an ultimatum. Leave now, and we go home to face court-martial and dishonor. Stay, and we're exiled forever. No going back to Earth. No seeing our families again, no retirement benefits or veterans' care. We become non-persons in the eyes of human civilization. The silence was deafening. Morrison could see the conflict in every face. Duty to family warring with duty to conscience. Lieutenant Williams stepped forward first. Sir, my daughter Jessica graduates from the academy next month. I've been planning to attend her commissioning ceremony since she was 12 years old. Morrison nodded, feeling his heart break a little. Williams had every right to choose her family over strangers. But, she continued, just called me an idealist when I told her why I joined the service. She said I wanted to save the universe. Maybe it's time I prove her right. I'm staying. One by one, the crew made their choices. Dr. Collins, whose wife was pregnant with their first child. Ensign Bradley, whose parent had sacrificed everything to pay for his academy education. Chief Engineer Reynolds, 3 years from retirement and a comfortable pension. When the count was finished, every single crew member had chosen exile. Morrison felt something he hadn't expected, pride mixed with heartbreak. These people were throwing away everything they'd worked for, abandoning everyone they loved, to save a species they'd barely known existed a month ago. That night, Morrison recorded a message that would be broadcast across human space. This is Commander Jake Morrison of the New Horizon. We stand here not as representatives of Earth or the human colonies, but as representatives of conscience. We've discovered that the Kithera plague was artificially created, an act of genocide that the Coalition has chosen to ignore for political convenience. If saving innocent lives makes us criminals, then we accept that judgment. Some things matter more than following orders. Some things matter more than going home. Morrison's broadcast spread through human space like wildfire. Within days, it was being played in bars on frontier worlds, discussed in academy classrooms, and debated in parliament halls across Earth. The official response from Coalition High Command was swift and harsh. Morrison and his crew were branded as traitors, their families questioned by security forces, their bank accounts frozen. But something unexpected began happening in the darker corners of human space. Captain David Chun was loading medical supplies onto his freighter Mercy's call when the message came through his ship's communication system. He'd been hauling cargo between the outer colonies for 15 years, and he'd seen enough coalition politics to know corruption when he smelled it. The idea that an entire species was being left to die while bureaucrats worried about their careers made his blood boil. "Plot a course for the Kithara system," he told his navigator. "Sir, that's a quarantine zone. We'll lose our shipping license." Chin looked at the cargo manifest, showing emergency medical supplies destined for a mining colony that could wait another month. Some things are more important than licenses. Similar conversations were happening across dozens of ships. Captain Ruth Thompson commanded the science vessel Nightingale, fresh from a successful research mission in the Beta Sector. When she heard Morrison's words, she thought about her own children and what she'd want someone to do if they were dying alone in the darkness. The converted passenger liner New Dawn had been carrying tourists to the pleasure worlds when Captain Bill Foster received the broadcast. He looked out at his passengers, wealthy civilians who'd paid thousands of credits for their luxury cruise, and made an announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid our vacation is going to be delayed. We're taking a detour to help some folks who really need it." To his amazement, not a single passenger demanded to be let off at the nearest port. 3 weeks after Morrison's broadcast, Lieutenant Williams stood at her sensor station, watching something that shouldn't have been possible. "Sir, I'm reading 47 vessels holding position at the quarantine zone boundary. Everything from military surplus to converted civilian ships." Morrison stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Freighters loaded with medical supplies. Research vessels packed with volunteer scientists. Even a few small military ships whose crews had apparently decided that conscience trumped orders. "They're calling themselves a Mercy Fleet," Williams continued, her voice filled with wonder. "Captain Chin of the Mercy's call is requesting permission to coordinate relief efforts." The communication that came through showed a grizzled freighter captain with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Commander Morrison, this is David Chun. We heard your message. Figured you could use some company." Over the following days, more ships arrived. The response from Earth was chaotic. Some colonies condemned the Mercy Fleet as dangerous radicals, while others began secretly supplying them with medical equipment and research materials. Families of the crews faced harassment from coalition loyalists, but also received support from unexpected quarters. Morrison's own daughter Amy became something of a celebrity at her school when she defended her father's actions in a debate class. "My dad isn't a traitor," she'd said, her words recorded and spread across the networks. "He's doing what humans are supposed to do, help people who need helping." The real breakthrough came when Dr. Parker's expanded research team, now including scientists from a dozen ships, made a startling discovery about human biology and the quantum plague. "It's incredible," Dr. Parker explained during a fleet-wide briefing. "Human immune systems don't just resist the plague. They actually produce compounds that can neutralize it. Our biology processes quantum energy completely differently than Kithara physiology. We're naturally immune, and we might be the key to curing them." But the most shocking revelation came from Captain Thompson's intelligence team aboard the Nightingale. The former Coalition intelligence officer, Commander Alex Stone, had been analyzing plague samples and cross-referencing them with classified databases he still had access to. The plague was created by the hegemony during their war with the Kithara 200 years ago, Stone reported. But here's the real kicker. The Coalition has known about 17 other quarantine zones with similar artificial plagues. Different species, same pattern. They're letting entire civilizations die to avoid diplomatic complications. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Mercy Fleet. These weren't isolated incidents. This was systematic abandonment of inconvenient populations. The galaxy's most powerful government was condemning entire species to death because saving them might upset political relationships. That night, Morrison made another broadcast. This one aimed not just at human space, but at every species in the galaxy. "This is Commander Morrison of the Human Mercy Fleet. We've discovered that the Kithara plague was artificially created and deliberately ignored by the Coalition. But they're not alone. 17 other species have been quarantined with similar artificial plagues. The Coalition knows these are weapons, not natural disasters, and they're choosing to let entire civilizations die rather than risk political complications. The response was immediate and explosive. Species across the galaxy began demanding answers about their own quarantined populations. Coalition member governments found themselves facing angry citizens asking why their taxes funded an organization that watched genocide happen. On the Kithera homeworld, the changes were dramatic. Cities that had been dark for months began glowing again as their inhabitants regained health. Crystal gardens that had withered bloomed with renewed energy. Children who had been dying were running to the streets, their laughter creating beautiful light displays as their crystalline bodies reflected their joy. Elder Zara, now much healthier and showing the natural iridescence that made her species so beautiful, met with Morrison in the rebuilt council chambers. "Your people have given us back our future," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely detect. "But more than that, you've shown the galaxy that some bonds are stronger than law, some duties more sacred than orders." Morrison looked out the crystal windows at Human and Kithera children playing together in the courtyard below. Their games were creating beautiful patterns of light and sound as their different biologies interacted in ways that delighted both species. "We didn't just save the Kithera," Morrison realized. "We started something bigger, a movement that says no civilization should face extinction alone." The Mercy Fleet had become more than a rescue mission. It had become the foundation of something new, a community built on the principle that conscience mattered more than convenience, that some things were worth any sacrifice. And in the depths of space, more ships kept coming. 6 months after the first human ship entered Kithera space, Dr. Parker stood in her expanded laboratory with tears streaming down her face. After countless sleepless nights and hundreds of failed experiments, she was looking at something that should have been impossible, a cure that actually worked. "Jake, you need to see this," she called over the communication system. Morrison arrived to find Parker staring at 2 test samples under a quantum microscope. One showed the familiar gray corruption of plague-infected Kithera tissue. The other glowed with the healthy rainbow iridescence that marked a living Kithera. "We did it," Parker whispered. "The cure works. But there's something you need to understand about how it works." She pulled up a complex biological chart that Morrison pretended to understand. The treatment creates a permanent biological connection between human and Kithera immune systems. It's not dependence exactly, but it's close. Their bodies will need regular supplementation from human-produced proteins to maintain immunity. Morrison stared at the data. "You're saying they'll be tied to us forever?" "Both species will be tied to each other. It's true symbiosis. We need them as much as they need us. The quantum energy processing that happens in their bodies actually enhances human immune function. We're stronger together than apart." The implications hit Morrison like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just about curing a plague. This was about 2 species becoming permanently linked at the most fundamental biological level. Elder Zara arrived for briefing an hour later, her crystalline body now showing the full spectrum of colors that indicated perfect health. With her came representatives from the other Mercy Fleet ships and the surviving Kithera Leadership Council. "The cure works," Morrison announced without preamble, "but it comes with permanent consequences that both our species need to understand." Dr. Parker explained the biological symbiosis in terms everyone could grasp. When she finished, the room fell silent. Humans and Kithera looked at each other with new understanding. They were about to become the first truly integrated interspecies civilization in galactic history. "So our children will grow up together," said Captain Shunned, who had become the unofficial leader of the civilian Mercy Fleet. "Human and Kithera biologically connected." "More than that," Dr. Parker replied. "Their children will be healthier, stronger, more resistant to disease. Both species would benefit from the connection." Elder Zara spoke for the Kithera Council. "You have already sacrificed everything for us. Your homes, your families, your futures. Now you offer to tie your very biology to ours. Why?" Morrison looked around the room at faces that had become family over the past months. Human crew members who had thrown away their old lives. Kithera survivors who had found hope when all seemed lost. Children of both species who played together without caring about the political implications. Because it's right, he said simply, because we're stronger together. And because someone needs to show the galaxy that different species can be more than just allies. We can be family. The implementation began immediately. Within weeks, the first large-scale treatments were underway. Kithera, who had been dying for months, watched their bodies heal as human-derived proteins restore their natural biological functions. The results were more dramatic than anyone had hoped. Not only were they cured, but they were healthier than they'd been in generations. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source. Morrison was reviewing treatment schedules when Lieutenant Williams burst into his office with news that changed everything. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Coalition flagship Sovereign. It's Admiral Hayes, but this time he's not alone." The hologram that appeared showed not just Hayes, but representatives from a dozen Coalition member species. The Villani, the Sectari, even delegates from the proud hegemony worlds that had created the plague in the first place. "Commander Morrison," Hayes began, his voice carrying none of its previous authority. "The Coalition Council has voted to officially recognize the new Federation as a legitimate government and provide full support for your medical research programs." Morrison blinked in surprise. "Sir, the other quarantine zones have been opened," Hayes continued. "All 17 of them. Species that have been written off as lost causes are being treated using protocols developed by your people. The galaxy owes you a debt that can never be repaid." But the real surprise came from the hegemony representative, a species that Morrison had learned to think of as monsters for creating the plague in the first place. "Commander Morrison, the hegemony formally apologizes for the weapon we created centuries ago. We offer full reparations to the Kithera people and request permission to contribute medical supplies to your Federation." Over the following months, the transformation was remarkable. The new Federation grew to encompass 47 species, every race that had been abandoned or quarantined by the old Galactic Order. They established their headquarters in the rebuilt Kithera capital, where crystal spires now shared space with human architecture in designs that neither species could have imagined alone. Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new Federation starbase, watching human and Kithera children playing the garden below. Their games created beautiful patterns of light and sound as their biologically linked systems interacted. These children would grow up as something new, not just human or Kithera, but citizens of a civilization that proved different species could become one people. Lieutenant Williams joined him at the viewport. She wore the insignia of the Federation Medical Corps now, having been promoted to lead their interspecies health programs. "Any regrets, Jake?" she asked. Morrison watched a group of human and Kithera teenagers working together on an art project that used both species' natural abilities. The humans provided the emotional resonance, while the Kithera crystallized it into permanent beauty. Neither could have created such work alone. "Just one," he replied, "that it took a genocide to teach us that the strongest civilizations aren't built on power or wealth. They're built on the willingness to risk everything for what's right." The new Federation had become a beacon for the galaxy, proof that sometimes the most important victories came not from following rules, but from breaking them in the name of compassion. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together, united by the simple human principle that no one should suffer alone. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their courage. It was their stubborn, reckless, beautiful refusal to accept that anyone was beyond saving. They had shown the galaxy that true strength came not from standing alone, but from lifting each other up, no matter the cost. And in doing so, they had saved not just the Kithera, but the very soul of galactic civilization itself.